Yeah, so in regarding surrogacy, in Chapter 4, Outsourcing Reproduction, you have this. Like abortion, ART is presented as protecting women from the dictates of their own bodies and providing them with the necessary tool in the battle for their empowerment. That's exactly what you're getting at here, where reproductive rights are being sold as an opportunity for the woman to control their own lives. However, you argue differently.
Well, I think for a start, we're not really talking about the control of one's own life. We're talking about the control of many others. And I do talk a lot later in the book about the supposed clash of rights, the right to bodily integrity versus the right to life, and how we can perhaps come to some kind of a consensus there. But when it comes to commercial surrogacy, it involves an expectation that an awful lot of other people will be hurt, will have their own rights curtailed, or their own lives ended potentially for the sake of somebody having a baby, a much wanted baby. It involves the biological enslavement of another woman to produce the much desired baby. Sometimes it involves more than one. It can involve the woman who actually bears the baby. It can involve the egg donor. It can involve a sperm donor. There can be multiple people, multiple agencies involved in that. So we have to stop looking at children and childbearing as a right in itself, because we cannot ask other people to harm themselves or to sell themselves into a form of slavery to give us what we want. You know, there is so much more to the mother-baby relationship than that. I would like to say, before taking it any further, I have huge sympathy for women who cannot have children. I think infertility is one of the great crosses that women and couples are expected to carry largely alone. And I don't think we have, as a society, and in some ways even as a church, really found the right ways to support women in that situation. I know multiple couples who, for all sorts of reasons, have never been able to have children, and I've become very aware of just how painful it is. And it's a pain that never goes away. You know, the woman will not be having babies when her friends are having babies. Her children won't be graduating from college when her friends' children are. She'll never be a grandparent. I mean, there are so many stages of life that are affected by that one loss, if you like, that one that one cross that they're having to carry. So I do feel that couples like that need a lot of support and need to be able to look at alternatives like NAPRO technology, for example, or adoption, international adoption, for example, which I know a number of couples who've gone down that route. So I'm in no way saying to couples you can't have children, the fact that you can't have a child isn't important, because I know as a parent myself how important children are. But in the end, nobody has a right to a child, because once a human being becomes a right, their own rights become less important. We've had situations with commercial surrogacy, for example, of surrogate babies being just dumped. I mean, there were a few cases in the papers, you know, the Thai surrogates, you know, with the baby with Down syndrome, for example, and it can happen. I mean, I cite a few examples in my book of a child who, for whatever reason, the commissioning parents don't collect them, who becomes stateless, homeless, parentless, with 5 potential parents and no parents. We've had cases of there's what's sometimes called a black market in babies in India, where excess surrogate babies are sold off into the criminal underworld. You know, you're talking about creating a situation in which an awful lot of human lives are wasted or are placed in very abusive or vulnerable situations. Did that come as a surprise?
I did not know that the quote unquote waste inherent in surrogacy, children that are no longer wanted. And then you have this question, what do you do with the child? Because it's still there.
Mm. Well,
And
what
if the
you have, yeah,
yeah,
that's,
and if the child has a defect, like,
mm,
I mean, in America, it's very vogue to just say, "Oh, your child has a defect," like just get rid of it. That's not. Don't put yourself through that.
yeah. Same in the UK. Over 90% of babies with Down syndrome, for example, are aborted. But the really sad thing is with commercial surrogacy is quite often, I'm talking about international surrogacy here, where couples go to developing countries. Very often the surrogate mother will not have the right to say no if she is told to have an abortion. You know, if a scan reveals there is something wrong with the baby, she will not have a right to say no. So where does the right to make choices come into it when the surrogate mother has to have an abortion because the commissioning couple don't want the baby? I even came across cases in my studies where women could be given abortion pills without their knowledge and would then be told they'd had a miscarriage because they're given so many pills in these baby factories that they've no way of knowing what they're taking. And but what really did shock me, and it takes a lot to shock me because of the nature of the research I conduct, was there was a documentary that was screened around the time I was doing my work of where a journalist went to India and she found that there was this whole black market of white babies. And what would happen is quite often these weren't even leftover babies. The surrogate mother would have, say, 2 or 3 embryos implanted into her womb. She would give birth to twins or triplets, but the commissioning parents would be told she'd had one baby. So they'd take the one baby home and the other would be left. And it was quite a deliberate act in that case. And then the babies would be sold. So there could be commissioning parents out there in America, in Britain, in other parts of Europe, who don't even know that they have children out there somewhere, you know, and have no way of knowing. Now, these may be unusual situations. I'm sure there are, you know, clinics in India that would never do that. But how could you ever know? You'd always have that question mark in your mind. That's what the first thing that came to mind when I saw that was that sense of unknowing, you know, and no one really knows what happens to the surrogate mothers after they've given birth. They're usually very well looked after until they give birth, but afterwards those clinics have no interest in taking care of them. We don't know how many of them develop complications, how many of them develop postnatal depression or post-traumatic stress disorder from losing the baby. You know, there are very few follow-up studies in terms of what happens to them. So, you know, we are mortgaging the happiness and health of a good many women in the name of giving Western couples their dream baby.
We have no knowledge on what happens to those extra children. Nothing is known what happens to.
No, well, the first time I heard about it was literally this journalist going to meet obviously some kind of a gangster in some location in India, and she said a baby was literally handed to her. You can have the baby now. So many rubles. I can't rupees. Sorry, I can't remember what she said.
Mm-hmm.
Said the price was. And that was the first time she had come across the issue. That was the first time I had ever heard of it. So, I mean, where did that baby come from? Who were its parents? I don't imagine the person selling the baby even knew.
Oh my gosh.
You know, and now India has made concerted efforts to try to control the industry. I will say that at the time I was writing the book, India was the fertility tourism capital of the world. That was where you went to get your baby, and there were surrogacy agencies all over the West who would point people in the direction. Same-sex couples, infertile couples, that was the place they went. We had BBC documentaries and news reports basically giving free advertising to these clinics. I remember Dr. Patel particularly often came up in the British news. Since then, there have been changes in the law to stop foreigners from going in to as I think the ministry called it, to rent wombs. There has actually been an attempt to stop that. But of course, the difficulty is when one door closes, another one will open somewhere else. There will always be poor countries with women who are trapped in the poverty trap, who will be prepared to do this and who are ripe for exploitation. It should be up to Western governments to stop the flow of tourists into these countries, not to expect the countries themselves to stop them from coming in.